And we just want to say that we really do appreciate Timothy coming on. There is nobody that is better qualified to address this topic than Timothy. We really appreciate him coming on and addressing this topic with our listeners. And it is an honor to help inform as many people as we can about this, because this is the issue of our day. It really is. It is, and everybody can appreciate the seriousness of the things that we've been talking about. It is certainly, it certainly is a wake up call. But are you ready, Donna, to come on and get into the questions?
Okay, thank you so much. The first question is actually from me, but can this biohacking be done without our knowledge? You might have already answered that, but I want to be sure. Can it be done without our knowledge?
I suppose it could be. They've already, I mean, every time you go into the hospital and get blood drawn, they have your DNA. So certainly if they wanted to, and I would say that in terms of military application, I believe very strongly that they've already developed weapons that can target specific genomes. In other words, can be race specific, weapons that are designed to be race specific. So if they can develop weapons that are designed to be race specific, pathogens that are designed to be race specific, then could they not release pathogens into society, into communities that are capable of making genetic changes? I believe they can. I believe that that's why I think that the question of vaccinations is getting even more dangerous as we move along here with these technologies, because when the Ebola epidemic happened some years ago, I was concerned that an epidemic like Ebola that's widespread enough to where people are panicking and running for the vaccinations, that if those vaccinations had some kind of a mechanism in them that could propagate a genetic modification, even a slight genetic modification in the collective gene pool of the human race, or at least those people who are getting the vaccinations, that could be very, very dangerous, depending on what that modification is. And so that would be a case in which we would be unwittingly subject to genetic modification. Now, there's a dozen ways that could happen. I mean, one of my real concerns is we haven't gone this far yet. I don't believe in nanotechnology, but we could. I can envision a time in which nanobots could be released in mass in a given community. We would ingest those nanobots. We would breathe them in. Remember, they're the size of cells, human cells. You can't see them. You could literally breathe them in, and those nanobots could be programmed to make genetic modifications.
Wow.
Wow.
So yes, we certainly could be subject unwittingly to genetic modification. I don't know if we have the capabilities now to do it, but certainly in the future we will.
Okay, Ali's question is, isn't the LBGT movement moving in the same direction as the designer babies CRISPR-Cas9 stuff, like I Am Jazz? All you have to do is brainwash a kid from toddler age to think they're in the wrong body. And Viola, they don't even call it gender reassignment surgery now. They call it gender confirmation surgery. It's disgusting.
That's going to be part of the enhancement market. There will be enhancements that will come online in the future that will be marketed to transgender people, that will allow the major modifications to their chromosomes, to their DNA, that will effectively turn them into the other race. I'm sorry, to the other sex. Right now, that's a very crude form that they're using to accomplish the same. It's through surgery and it's through hormones. But in the future, surgery and hormones will be old school. They'll be making those changes on the genetic level. So yes, that is a big part of the market that's the emerging market for human enhancement. There will be a large part of that market will cater to transgender people. And effectively, we could have a third gender arise, a true binary gender.
Wow.
That's just overwhelmingly scary.
Yeah.
But thank you for letting us. You're helping us so much to understand the technology. We need to know that. Ellie wants to know, do you think the government will introduce or let loose the creatures they're creating?
I think they escape sometimes, but no, I don't think so. I mean, just consider this: the Chinese cloned a monkey. That was a big deal because cloning a sheep, there were some problems with that, But cloning a monkey, if you can clone a monkey, then you can clone a human being. It's a genome. You can use the same technology. It's the same procedure to clone a human being. So if you can clone a human being, here's my, and I hate to be, I hate to insert more terror into this subject, but here's my nightmare scenario. What if, let's say China, let's not implicate the United States in this yet, but let's say China has the ability to clone human beings. What would stop a government in secret from cloning a generation of slaves that nobody ever knows about? They're cloned, they live underground, a generation of slaves. I don't see what would stop an evil government from doing that. I mean, certainly they could, and in my mind, I mean, you get your Stalin, you get your Hitler. You could very well run into that kind of scenario in the future. I mean, Hitler was trying to create was trying to breed the Übermenschen out in the open. I mean, it was a public program to try and breed the Aryan race. But could something far more devious be happening out of sight and out of mind in the underground world where clones are being generated as slaves? And the same could be said for women could be giving birth to babies, and those babies could be, we already know that that's happening, the sex trafficking that's happening all over the earth is basically generations of people being enslaved for sex. That's happening. Everybody knows about that. But that's through procreation. I'm talking about a much more expedient process through cloning. And of course, you could then clone the perfect slave.
And I know this whole program is exposing the dangers of people that participate in this biohacking and genetic modification. But as you're speaking here, I'm thinking of so much more. What are the spiritual implications in participating? And I'm thinking psychological implications. There's so much here. But what are the spiritual implications if people would participate in this knowingly or unknowingly?
Are you referring to the biohackers or just in general?
Well, when you really participate in this, when you allow your genes to be modified, what are the spiritual implications?
That's where it's sort of a gray area because human to human genetic gene therapy, where if you have a mutation in a gene that causes a particular kind of cancer, let's say blood cancer, and somebody in your family or one of your friends, somebody you know, their gene, that particular gene that they have is not mutated. It's a good gene. It functions properly. So that gene can be taken and they can replace your mutated gene with that gene, which is what is beginning to happen. What many hospitals and universities and and hospitals are experimenting with this now, and they're having actually fantastic results. Then I don't believe that there is a danger. Why? Because you're taking the natural human gene, the one that you should have, and you're replacing the mutated gene, the gene that has mutated. And we're all highly mutant at this point. So we've degenerated from Adam. Obviously, we're experiencing genetic entropy. All life is experiencing genetic entropy. So we're highly mutant. So if I have a mutated gene, and I can get the correct gene from, second or third cousin, and they can take that gene and replace my mutated gene, then they haven't changed my humanity. They haven't made me something other than human. They're not fooling around with the genetic code in such a way that will alter the human genetic code. They're just repairing. It's like a spare part being inserted in where your gene is broken. They replace it with one that is functional. So there's a gray area here. I mean, if your child, and for those who are maybe thinking right now that they'd never do that would be equivalent to taking the mark of the beast. Well, you have to think of it in these terms. You have a son or a daughter that's has bone cancer, some kind of terrible, devastating disease, and they could be cured in the future, and will be able to be cured, by the way, through gene therapy. That mutated gene could be replaced with a functional gene. Would you do it? I would. If it was human to human.
Right. And the danger comes in is when you allow them to mix animal genes or things like that with our DNA and with our genes.
That's or to modify the genome in such a way that you're changing the blueprint.
And that's where the spiritual part is. What we should look out for. That would be wrong for us to allow that.
Yes, and by the way, there are a lot of people already who are opting in for the gene therapies that are available. Again, taking a functional gene and replacing a mutated gene with a functional gene, you have not changed the genetic code. All you've done is you've fixed the mutation. And by the way, that mutation is breaking the genetic code. That mutation is it's a mutation. It's deleterious.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you remove that deleterious mutation and you put the right gene into its place, you have you're creating a sequence that is natural, that you're supposed to have in the first place. So, but as soon as you start crossing over into cross-species genetics and into some of these other things, then you start getting into trouble really fast.
Well, I know I've seen this commercial on TV, maybe others have, and I can't remember, it starts with a P, I believe, but it's some kind of eye stuff where they say the ingredients come from the jellyfish. So it's already out there. They're already doing it. They're already advertising it on TV, putting animal genes in with our drugs or supplements that we buy. So anyway, it's in there. It's already doing it. Okay, question from Allie. There was an episode of Through the Wormhole hosted by Morgan Freeman that talked about the technology to take stem cells from a human male and manipulate it to become an ovum and fertilize it with the male partner's sperm, gestational. And it's a mechanical womb, first developed for dolphins. And there you have a baby with two genetic same-sex parents. Have you heard about this?
Yes. Yeah, we can. I mean, in vitro, we have advanced. What's stopping us from advancing any further? And when I say us, of course, I just mean the scientists that are working on this in the United States and elsewhere, but specifically in the United States. What's hindering the geneticists in the United States is the regulations. There's a lot of red tape when you start to deal with human embryos and stem cells, and rightfully so, because of how you have to harvest those stem cells. I mean, you get them from aborted babies in many cases. So there's a lot of red tape there. There's a lot of moral problems there. And I am not at all in favor of creating babies from multiple donors, because it's unnatural, and I think that could lead to all kinds of problematic scenarios. So the in vitro stuff, the artificial womb stuff, I think is very dangerous,
Man.
because now you're moving into something that is wholly unnatural. And again, it's not like the gene therapy where you're taking a broken gene out and you're putting the right one in. Now you're actually changing the mechanics. And again, there's a lot of reasons why the embryonic stuff is morally questionable, dealing with abortion and so forth.
Has there been enough time using this genetic engineering or the biohacking to find the problems? Has there been any research about, to discover the problems, or is it just too new?
What problems?
Like the problems that would happen. Like, has there been enough time to see problems that?
Well, the big concern that the government has, and that's why the government is trying to get in there and co-opt this thing before it gets out of control, is the development of a biological weapon or a pathogen that somebody accidentally creates. Because what most of these guys are doing, most of these guys aren't turning themselves into the Incredible Hulk. What most of these guys are doing is making their pets glow in the dark, making their beer glow in the dark, creating new kinds of beer. They're making very minor changes to bacteria in most cases. The more advanced guys are curing their pets and curing other people's pets, and then the most advanced guys, the most adventurous guys, I guess you could say, are actually making modifications to their own biology. But there is a very real danger in the future. I don't think we're there yet, but in the future of, I don't know, maybe some kind of maybe a terrorist organization getting a hold of the CRISPR technology and developing a bioweapon. And that is what the government is very concerned about. That is one of the big concerns for biohacking.
Lois says talked about a cancer cure noted in mice that involves several elements, one of them being certain DNA strands. Can I assume that it is genetic engineering?
What is genetic engineering? I didn't hear the first part of that question.
Cure, the cancer cure that's been on the news.
Can you just repeat the question, Donna?
Okay, I'll just repeat it. Lois, she said the news talked about a cancer cure noted in mice that involves several elements, one of them being certain DNA strands. Can I assume that it is genetic engineering?
Yes, cancer. I would say it's very likely, because cancer fundamentally is a problem of mutation. That certain genes get mutated, it leads to cancer. So at the fundamental level, cancer is a result of genetic mutation. So how do you cure cancer? You fix the genes. And that is going to be, we will cure. I'm absolutely confident that we're going to cure cancer, because it is a result of genetic mutation. So if we can perfect these gene therapy technologies and simply replace these mutated genes. In fact, here's what they want. Here's what they would like to do. They would like to vaccinate in the future, just like we vaccinate against polio or whatever, to be able to vaccinate against some of these mutations, to where these genetic repairs, these gene repairs, can be automatically introduced into the public, into the gene pool, to where, just like the polio vaccine eradicated polio from the human gene pool, from the populace, we can maybe in the future eradicate some certain genetic disorders, mutations, from the human gene pool, and that's what their goal is. And they would view that as a major breakthrough, a major achievement in medical science. And in some ways, it would be.
And Allie has a question. She said, have you heard about how they're developing marketing for the cloning of your deceased loved ones, like military spouses? being encouraged to store their DNA for cloning in case they get killed. And people are encouraged to store the DNA of loved ones with terminal illnesses so they can just be cloned and the person can have their loved ones back.
It's kind of like the new cryogenics. Cryogenics was kind of a big deal for a while, freezing your loved ones when they died, because with the hope that in the future we would have the technology to thaw them out and maybe revive them or whatever. There's a lot of people who have been frozen with that hope, and but the cryogenics was very problematic for lots of reasons. But cloning, on the other hand, is much more plausible in my mind, at least. And I'm no scientist. I'm not a geneticist, but I can see how, if people were willing to do the cryogenics, have their bodies frozen after they die, certainly, I mean, all you need is genetic material, at least theoretically, to clone somebody. So I wouldn't be surprised if that really accelerated here in the coming years.
Well, if a person participates in this gene modification, does this show a lack of faith in God and in not trusting healing from God, or giving us the grace to just live with our illnesses?
Well, that's a personal question, but that depends on how far you want to take that. I mean, the same could be said for a pacemaker. Somebody who gets a pacemaker, I mean, or some other kind of. They're already doing the chips in the brains for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's with some success. These are very important questions to contemplate. But I mean, again, if you're talking gene, let's just put it this way. If it was a choice between chemotherapy and gene therapy, as long as the genes were human genes, especially if they came from one's family, gene therapy makes a whole lot more sense to me than chemotherapy.
You got that right.
Amen.
Because chemotherapy is just designed to kill the body and hopefully kill the cancer too. And now it's coming out, of course, that chemotherapy spreads cancer. Big shock. I think a lot of us figured that out a long time ago. I've had multiple family members. I've watched multiple family members go through chemotherapy. So, and it wasn't a breach of their faith, in my mind.
And I always say that you do not know how you're going to react until you're in that situation. I know in 2012, I had a round with cancer. Hey, it was a rude awakening. And even though God delivered me through surgery, and I did take a supplement called Essiac, which was developed by an old nurse named Cassie, and I heard it was tried and true, that she had cured cancer with it. So I decided, well, what's the harm in trying that? But until you're in the situation, and you're right, it is a personal thing. It's a personal thing you have to deal with between you and God. And the part about, I had to think, okay, I don't know for sure, but if they asked me if I should take chemotherapy, what would my answer be? And I was forced, because I was in that situation, to think it out. And yet to this day, I still have blood work, and praise God, I am still cancer free. But you always think, like when you get some other thing wrong with you, think, oh my, is it cancer? Because once you hear that big C, your life changes. And so it is a personal decision, and I realize that. But I know people are struggling with this because they have to make these.
You could also consider, I mean, because we're going to have this technology soon too. If your arm was blown off or cut off, and there was a replacement, somebody else's arm, just like we routinely we replace hearts, we replace livers, we replace different organs. In the near future, I think we'll start to be able to replace appendages. So let's say your hand, let's make it less dramatic. Let's say your hand's blown off, and the technology exists to have another hand attached. As long, in my mind, I mean, it seems crazy, but it's not. People would have thought 100 years ago that a heart transplant was ridiculous, but it's routine now. So if you're willing to have somebody else's heart in your body or somebody else's hand attached to your arm, in the future they'll probably be able to do with eyeballs and all kinds of things. I would draw the line at maintaining the trademarks of humanity. In other words, is it going to alter my humanity? If it's human to human, the answer is no. Blood transfusions. My dad has blood cancer and gets transfusions all the time. That's somebody else's blood. And I think that it's, I don't know if it's the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witness or somebody that absolutely will not receive a blood transfusion because they believe that it alters you in a way that is a breach of biblical morals. But we're already doing this. I mean, if you really think hard about it, we're already making these decisions, and these decisions are easy for people who are in those circumstances. I mean, if you needed a blood transfusion, let's say that, you know, you were one of the victims at the of that massacre in Las Vegas. Well, you really wouldn't have had a choice. If you were bleeding out and you were wheeled into the emergency room, guess what they're going to do? They're going to put somebody else's blood in you. Of course, the same type of blood, but they're going to put somebody else's blood in you. And then, you know, you don't even have a choice there. But I don't believe that that's, again, that would be a breach of that would cross over into a problematic area in terms of biblically speaking, because you're talking human to human blood in a human body, a human heart being put in somebody else's human heart being put into a human body, a human gene replacing a mutated human gene, human to human. I think that's the key.
Yes.
As soon as we start getting into non-human stuff, which will eventually precipitate, that's when I think we really need to draw some lines.
And
we're not there yet, but guess what? Our kids will be there.
Right. And when you talked about the humanity, that brings in my next question. And these were really from me because I have a lot of questions in this area because just like other people, I've prayed and prayed for God to heal me. It's not a matter of lack of faith for me. Something is wrong. It could be a connection of things that I've done in my body from years ago that has caused some of this, not taking proper care of my body. And I understand all that. But it's not the matter of me having faith. I have faith. God's removed tumors from me and healed me. If he didn't heal me now, I wouldn't be here now. But there are so many people struggling with this. So all this is a real temptation for people like me that are not healed. I'm still waiting on God for healing, but it would be a great temptation for me to succumb to, even now, not that I would do it, but I mean, I could see how a person in my situation would be tempted to say, oh, well, it's just an animal and it will help me, and so I'll do it. So all this is very much questions. Like you said, our next generation, our children and grandchildren are going to have to make these decisions. And this next question is about, well, I'll just ask, do you think that many would have a problem with pride with all these enhancements that make them so much physically superior? You know what the Bible says about pride going before the fall, but I could see how if a person kept getting themselves genetically modified, that they would become so prideful, and that would be a problem. And I could just see myself how that would happen. But what do you think about that?
Transhumanism is predicated on pride. It is the hubris of a. It's an incredible level of hubris, in which a person decides that they are going to, as we were saying earlier, that they're going to do an end around the cross, to reject the gospel, but yet to try and attain eternal life. That's Luciferianism 101. That's the Garden of Eden. And of course, it was pride in the beginning, and it's still pride today. And it's a pride that stems from the pride of Lucifer himself. And so I think that the whole transhumanist agenda is prideful. It's arrogant. It's shaking one's fist at God. And people are going to consider us, you know, in the future here pretty soon, within the next decade. I think people like us are going to be considered not just Luddites, but we're going to be considered Neanderthals. That we We are afraid of technology. We're afraid of change, and we're going to be looked at as ignorant people who have a fear of technology. But in reality, it's not a fear of technology; it's a fear of God, because we know what happens and what is going to happen when we cross the Rubicon, the Genesis 6 Rubicon. We know what happens. Judgment precipitates. Judgment befalls as soon as that marker is crossed, and it's going to be crossed again. So yes, again, it's the whole thing's predicated on pride, and all you have to do is listen to or watch a prominent transhumanist debate, or listen to them on a radio show. The whole thing is laced with pride.
Thank you. I knew that you would agree with that. I just see that happening here. Lydia's question is, could this desire for immortality, for living an amazing life enhanced, be the mark of the beast? And the desire is in the head, and the action is the hand. If one walks in the Father Yah, then no desire for immortality, which I am trying the gene modification on. In other words, if you don't wait for God to give you immortality, you're going to try to enhance yourself.
Well, the desire for immortality is natural. Yes. We desire immortality because our progenitor was Adam, immortal. It's natural. It's a natural human impulse to desire immortality, to eschew death. And so the impulse is natural. But the believer looks to the cross for immortality, to the resurrection. The transhumanist looks to technology. And so I believe that there is, and to your question, I do believe that the mark of the beast is much more than an RFID chip. I never thought it would be an RFID chip. Some people, there was a time when people thought it could be a credit card. I think that the mark of the beast is a mark of a beast. I think there's a reason why it's called the mark of the beast, and I think it has to do with changing one's genetics so that you're no longer human.
And I do. In fact, years ago, the Lord gave me a revelation about a false communion that I feel is going to happen. And as we've done our research and listened to people like you, the probability would be that there would be some either Nephilim DNA or some kind of altering thing put in that communion. But I feel that the Lord showed me it would be offered to anyone as an end time worship, an act of worship. It has to be an act of worship. The mark of the beast does. So although they could incorporate having chips or other things in your body, it definitely has to be an act of worship. And in this process of partaking in the false communion, it would mean that this communion wafer or blood or wine would be changed somehow, and it would be offered to them as a one-time immortality. But that's for a whole nother show, which we have already done other places, and I can explain that at another time. But as far as this, I think you're right. It has to have something to do with changing our DNA by participating. So
we're made in the image of God. Posthumanism is going to give human beings the opportunity to be remade in the image of the beast.